Good morning, everybody. Please take a few seconds and like this video and subscribe to my channel. So what I'm going to talk about now, and it's going to be a short video because I've talked about this before in a previous video, but I want to isolate this topic alone and just kind of narrow in on how easy it is for someone who has been diagnosed with a mental illness to purchase a firearm. So I'm doing this just in case you didn't see the other video, or maybe you didn't get to the middle or end of that video and you didn't get to this part. But and the reason why I am so concerned about this is because um, my son has a diagnosed mental illness. I want to reiterate, and I'm going to say it over and over again, everybody who has a mental illness is not violence. I don't want to add more stigma to mental illness than already exists. But I just wanted to bring up the topic just so you all will be aware. So I did a little bit of research, and I asked the question, what do states and federal law do to I guess, have guidelines surrounding people purchasing firearms as it pertains to mental illness. And the result I got back was this. Not all United States automatically prohibit people diagnosed with a serious mental illness from purchasing guns simply because of the diagnosis. There is not a universal ban based on a mental health diagnosis alone. Federal and state laws focus on specific legal findings or events, not the diagnosis alone, not the diagnosis itself. So in other words, you may have taken your loved one who has a mental illness. It could be your son, daughter, it could be your spouse, it could be your sister, it could be your mother, your dad. This person may have gone to the doctor, and the doctor may have diagnosed them with, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, bipolar, and any other serious mental illness. And you may have that documented, but that documentation of what the doctor says alone is not cause for that person who has been diagnosed with the illness to be prohibited from purchasing a firearm. We're talking about states. When it comes to federal law, which governs all states, under federal law, and it lists the statute, it says a person cannot legally purchase or possess a firearm if they have been adjudicated as a mental defective. Why do they have to call these people defective? So if you have cancer or some other illness, would you want to be referred to as a physical defective? Stuff like this, terminology like this, is why there's such stigma attached to mental illness. But I digress. It says a person cannot legally purchase or possess a firearm if they have been adjudicated as a mental defective or involuntarily committed to a mental institution. And I had my son involuntarily committed for a brief time, and I had to jump through a lot of hoops to get that done, and I'm going to talk about that in another video. But anyway, these terms are legal standards, meaning they usually require a court or lawful authority determination, not just a clinical diagnosis, not just what the person's doctor says. A diagnosis of a mental illness alone does not automatically trigger these criteria. And then it goes on to say that state laws can vary widely. States differ in how they interpret, expand, and enforce restrictions beyond the federal law. So the next section talks about states with additional mental health related firearm prohibitions. States that are at least trying to do the right thing. It goes on to say that many states prohibit firearm purchase and possession for people with certain adjudications. And that includes involuntary commitments or competency rulings. And the states may report this information to the federal background check system, and that's known as NICS. And examples include, but it's not limited to Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and South Carolina. So there's more states that do this. They go a little bit extra, but they're all not included. So check and see if your state is included. I think my state may be included, but I'm not 100%. And then the next section talks about states with minimal or no additional state restrictions. So the states that I mentioned previously, they have additional restrictions. The following states do not have any separate statutes prohibiting people with mental illness from owning guns beyond the federal statutes, meaning they rely on the federal disqualification alone. And those states historically include Colorado, Alaska, New Hampshire, and Vermont. That's just a small list. There may be more. Do your research for your state. But the states that I have mentioned lack state level prohibitions focus on mental illness, and they depend on federal law to disqualify persons with certain commitments or adjudications. So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit more about diagnosis versus legal determination. So across the country, a legal diagnosis of a mental illness by itself generally does not bar someone from buying or possessing of firearms. What matters legally are court findings or commitments that meet the statute definition. And that would include, just reiterating what I said before, and that includes involuntary commitment or adjudication of incompetence. However, and there's always ways that people can fall through the crack. So even when a law should disqualify someone under the federal criteria, states aren't always required to report mental health records to the National Instant Criminal Background System, the background check system, again, otherwise known as NICS, which background checks rely on, so the enforcement of even the federal laws can vary. The bottom line is federal law bars firearm purchases for people legally adjudicated as mentally defective or involuntarily committed, and this applies nationwide. A serious mental illness diagnosis alone without those legal actions does not automatically prohibit someone from buying a gun in all states. So people are out here trying to protect themselves, their families, their loved ones that have been diagnosed with the mental illness. They're trying to protect them from doing something that they can't undo. But it's hard, and federal and state statutes may help somewhat, but people fall through the cracks. So I would suggest that you all do the research for your states. I'm trying to protect myself, my family, and innocent people out here on the streets from being harmed, but it's not easy. So just wanted to reiterate that, and I would say do your own research for your state.